Thank you. Thanks. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be here with my friends Rena and Pete and my new friend Rob and my email friend Maggie. So glad to meet in person, but it's a real thrill for me to be here and talk about what I would say is probably my favorite thing to talk about, which is learning communities in medical education and how connections really can make a difference. So we'll jump right in. I have no financial disclosures, unfortunately, related to this presentation. And actually, Rena already disclosed that I am the National Chair of the Learning Communities Institute, Incorporated. We are now a actual organization, which has been also an interesting thing to take something out of the primordial ooze and then have to meet with the IRS and everything to become a real nonprofit, but that's been exciting. So, let me just introduce you to my medical school. I come from a very old medical school, as you can see. The medical degree was the first degree granted at the University of Virginia, which means that the medical students get to process down first at graduation every year. We're big on tradition. So this is the class of 1867. This is the faculty and the students in front of our rotunda, and I'd like to think that the two guys in the front are probably the chairs of medicine and surgery. That's my guess, with the backs to each other, and no doubt. So, and here is the class of 2017 who will graduate next May. So that's a big difference in 150 years, right? So a lot of differences. Obviously, it's a very different picture of students. Our students are much more diverse. I will say we still have the bow ties going. That's kind of a Virginia thing, so that did not change. So not only diversity of students, but sheer numbers have made a huge difference. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but Dunbar, who was I believe, psychologist, sociologist who studied, an anthropologist maybe, studied kind of social relationships, talks about Dunbar's number, which is a number that's generally thought of as anywhere from 140 to 200, somewhere in there, the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships. Now, why New York City is the backdrop for this slide, I don't know if they don't think you guys can maintain stable social relationships, but I think it's thinking big numbers. So that's something to consider now that we all are moving into these medical school classes that are bigger and involving a lot more things. And that was a consideration for us. So obviously over the 150 years, there have been numerous calls for reform. Everybody from Flexner to the newest Carnegie report from Cook, Irby, and O'Brien. And so we have made lots of reforms, and I know you guys have made the same ones here. So we've changed our curricular content. We've added ethics, we've added medical communication, we've talked about caring for the spectrum of disease through diversity, we've talked about patient safety, we've added in interprofessional collaboration, humanities, personalized medicine, healthcare policy, community service. So we've added a lot, right? We haven't really taken anything out, at least we haven't taken much out, so that's a consideration. We've, of course, changed our assessment approaches, our pedagogical approaches. We've gone from teacher-directed learning to learner-directed learning. We've gone from PBL to TBL, online learning, simulated learning, standardized patient learning. So again, trying a lot of new things, adding a lot of new things. We have thought maybe we needed to lengthen medical education. We've thought maybe we need to shorten medical education. So clearly, we've been trying to address these, massive changes that we're trying to address change with a lot of change. And where has that gotten us? What it's gotten us is some issues that we really need to think about that, I kind of term the hazards in the learning environment, from trying again to we've got a lot of students, they're very diverse, their needs are diverse, and we're trying to jam a lot of things and change our approaches. And what we've ended up with are some issues. So one being kind of these economic forces that our teachers, many of whom are physicians, also have a lot of clinical demands on them and RVU demands and things that are kind of coming from different places and perhaps limiting their role as a teacher. We have specialists and subspecialists who then kind of have more of these narrow focuses, which makes it a little more challenging to kind of have that generalist approach and starts to subdivide our curriculum. I think one thing that we think about a lot is kind of this social isolation that our students are experiencing. So maybe in the first the pre-clerkship phase where there's long hours of studying and there's a lot more books and learning and podcasts, et cetera, that are they by themselves doing some of this and isolating themselves and we don't kind of know what's going on with them, not connecting as much interclass, maybe within their class, but also certainly interclass. And then once you get in the clerkship timing or you're doing rotations, there's that whole balancing of being a full-time student and a full-time caregiver. And that's a lot of demands on the students as well. Maybe losing contact with some of their classmates that they had bonded with and they don't even see each other for almost a year. And then there is what we call the hidden curriculum, which I don't think is hidden at all. I think it's fairly obvious actually to most of us, where there's this kind of tension of bringing our learners from kind of the periphery into the center of trying to give them authentic roles. And are we actually doing that and bringing them into our tribe with our special languages that we use and customs that we have? And I think that sometimes starts to be at odds with the personal values of the students themselves. They've learned all this, we've taught them all this humanism, and then maybe that's not what they're seeing on a day-to-day basis. So that, I think, can create a lot of anxiety for the student and fragment the learning environment. So these are some of the things that we've been thinking about, I think, across the board. And a lot of it is, we have students, and this is it across a lot of the medical schools that have learning communities, that one of the reasons that we thought about this is the student need for, I just want somebody to know me here, kind of just feeling lost and maybe falling through the cracks. So a colleague of mine, Liz Armstrong, who's the director of the Harvard Macy Institute, this comes from her paper, which is a case study on a fictional medical student, Emily Wilson, who goes to a fictional medical school that might be affiliated with 11 different hospitals and might be in Boston, Massachusetts, where what she was describing is you've got this student, they got 6 different clerkships, they got 11 different hospitals, so the number of permutations that could happen, that Emily and her classmates, none of them had the same schedule, and the residents had a different schedule, and the faculty had a different schedule, and so the chaos that was generating is a problem. And what is that problem? She describes this as medical education as a process management problem. And this really spoke to me, and this is something I've really latched onto. And when I've talked to when I spoke to the Council of Deans, all the deans of all the medical schools in the US, about learning communities, which was a stressful situation as a TED Talk. Know your audience. So I was trying, I've got to think business. And so this is a way, I think, of thinking about the problem we have. We have lots of little problems, but maybe overall, we have a problem with process management. So what is process management? Obviously a business term. And it comes from, not to say that students are Toyota automobiles, but it comes from that Japanese thinking of moving things through and really cutting out unnecessary steps, trying to really have oversight from beginning to end, knowing what you want at the end, so you are addressing that all along the way. And that is a way to align your strategy, improve your efficiency, improve your communication. So again, medical students are not cars, but I think if you'll bear with me a little, you can see kind of some of the parallels here. So as Liz says in her paper, that the lack of a system to guide the medical school experience makes it difficult to structure and improve the education process so that the students achieve clearly defined core competencies in a professional manner. And so all of these things that we've added in and moved around, and have we lost sight of a way to structure this and follow this longitudinally and frame it up so everything we're doing starts to make sense, particularly for the learner. And so maybe we could focus on a way to do that, and maybe a focus could be on the community, the learning environment that the student's in. And what we do know from Gardner is that the community does teach. If it's healthy and coherent, which is what we're hoping for, the community imparts a coherent value system. But if it is fragmented or sterile or degenerative, lessons are taught anyway, but not the lessons that heal and strengthen. And I think in medical education, we want to be healing and strengthening. And I think this, again, also speaks to me that this is where, if we could focus on the community, maybe this is a way that we could address some of the issues that we just talked about. So that's the theme here, that connections can make the difference. So what is a learning community? The classic definition comes from Macmillan and Chavis in the 80s, that a learning community is a group who share common values, they learn together, and they learn from each other. That's kind of, a little touchy-feely and kind of out there, but I think that the 4 elements that they define make a lot of sense. So one is membership. Everyone has to feel that they belong, that they are a true member of this learning community. Each member of the learning community has to have some influence on the community. Has to, not that there's not differences in the structures, but it's a little flatter and less hierarchical. Everybody has influence. Everyone has the ability to fulfill some personal needs within the structure of the learning community, and that there are shared events that foster some of these connections. So those are kind of the overarching thoughts that we want to kind of keep in mind when we're talking about a learning community. So what's the history? So the history goes way back to, Harry Potter-esque thought process. So the British house system, where you have a class of students and they're divided into smaller groups or houses or colleges or whatever they're called, for learning, for curriculum, but a lot for camaraderie and kind of keeping everyone, kind of divided up in a line and engagement, really. So people have allegiance to a smaller group, and maybe that's keeping them under Dunbar's number, so they can maintain stable social relationships. So that's kind of the start and where the idea probably originates. And then we see learning communities in America as the college systems come to America. So when you think of the societies and things at Harvard and at Yale and some of the older Northeastern universities in the US, really this is kind of some of the learning communities are centered around shared interests and shared inquiry. Some of them are really residential, but then kind of adding in the learning component. And really at this point in history, this is all undergraduate curriculum. So Evergreen State University, they're kind of one of the parents of the learning community movement in a lot of colleges areas, with real focus on curriculum and learning in these small groups. So a lot of the data that we use and a lot of the thinking we have comes from the undergraduate world. And then we, again, that was, in the contemporary world, again, mostly undergraduate, but they started looking at outcomes, and we're seeing better academic performance, better retention, values were kind of these shared learning goals and kind of centered around the community. And you can see how these things are all very positive and healing and strengthening, and this is kind of the direction that the learning community movement was going in. So how about in medical education, where are learning communities coming in? So here's the trick. They're called a lot of different things. So, and you may have heard of them in different settings, but communities, colleges, advisory colleges is a common term, societies, cells, docent teams. I think there's even other nomenclature that I didn't even include, which makes it a little challenging for the definition because we've got a lot of different names. So how did they evolve into med ed? So the parents in the med ed movement were absolutely Ron Arkey, who is a colleague that Pete and I have at Harvard, who's still there, and Louise Arnold at UMKC. They really were the ones who kind of started this movement in medical education in the 70s and 80s. Then there were some schools that became early adapters of this model through the 90s and 2000s, University of Iowa, University of Washington in Seattle, and then some more of us kind of came on, Stanford, Hopkins, Virginia, Arizona, Vanderbilt. So a lot of the schools started coming on with this, and we had our first meeting of the Learning Communities Institute, which at the time in 2005 was really just kind of a very loose consortium of schools that were doing something like this and meeting during the AAMC meeting just to kind of share ideas and see what everybody else was doing. So when the first kind of survey to see where is this happening started, that paper was published in 2009, but the survey was in 2006. And at that time, 18 schools identified themselves as having learning communities, whatever that meant at the time. We repeated that study, several of us in the Learning Communities Institute, in 2012, 8 years later, and at that point 66 schools said they had learning communities. So that was half of our respondents, and then at that time 44% of the AAMC schools, and when we asked, an additional 29 of them said they were considering it, whatever that meant for them. So you see that this is a movement. So that was the Ferguson study, that was our study, and we knew we really hit the big time when the LCME added a question on their annual survey of, does your school have learning communities? So for us, that was a watershed moment. So in 2013, 64% of schools, and in 2014, 73% of schools said they had learning communities at their school. So the trick is, what do they mean by that? And that is the big question for us, because we have no standard definition. We are working on it, as we can tell you. But we really do need a taxonomy, because, and this is what happened with problem-based learning. You know, everybody was saying, I'm doing problem-based learning, and then in the longitudinal integrated clerkships, everybody's like, I've got that, and it's 6 weeks long. And so I think that those organizations have all tried to define themselves, because the bottom line is you cannot do outcomes research, you can't do any research, really, that's meaningful if you don't define what you're doing. So the loose definition that we've tried to use is intentionally develop longitudinal groups that aim to enhance students' medical school experience and to maximize learning. So does any small group count? Because lots of people are teaching in small groups. They're doing clinical skills, they're doing problem-based learning, they're doing team-based learning, they're doing anatomy groups. You know, there's a lot of small group work, I think, at every medical school. But the small group alone, I think, in our thing is not sufficient. There's got to be the element of longitudinality, and what we're really looking at is across all of the medical school curriculum. So some of these things could be the basis of it, but probably with some additional components of advising, mentorship, something that adds longitudinality. And what do we mean by maximizing learning? And so this is what's been very interesting, because I think most of the schools that have gone to this have gone to it for different reasons. Sometimes for student affairs reasons, sometimes for curricular reasons, sometimes for community service reasons, sometimes for community building within the medical school reasons. And I think the more that we have all worked with each other and shared what we're doing, I think almost every school now has become what I call a hybrid learning community, because we find out this framework, it works. It works for all of those things. And that is a way of really uniting kind of curriculum and community service and making students feel like someone knows them here. So again, all the curricular and extracurricular things different schools are all doing, and I think more of us are doing more of those things within our learning communities. So in the study we published in 2014, these were the various areas that the schools said that their learning communities address. So you can see, you know, that top third or so, a high percentage of schools were doing. And so they have a lot to do with student affairs kind of functions, student well-being, but clinical skills was pretty high up there, community service was pretty high up there, and I would say now that some of the curricular things beyond clinical skills would move up in percentage at this point if we redid this survey. I think, again, because people are finding it works. So we have tried to look at our primary purpose, and this is a work in progress, so I can only share this much with you so far. But we surveyed all of our member schools to try and find out what does make a learning community. If we all can agree on this, probably that could be kind of the definitive taxonomy. Because at this point we have about 42 schools, plus or minus a few, and individual members from other schools. So what we found is that in a mission, in this one question we asked about mission, that the majority of schools were trying to support professional development. It was a lot about kind of really that professional identity formation, that this was a vehicle to really foster that, monitor that, support that. Also a way of fostering a sense of community. And so a good number of programs said that. These were kind of the specific things that they mentioned. And then lastly, under mission or primary purpose, having that sense of wholeness for the medical school experience. Again, addressing process management in a way from the student's view, to be able to unify curriculum and student support, because we can't separate those. You guys are the full example of this, the way that Pete and Rena work together. It's an acknowledgement of these are not separate things. These need to be integrated for the benefit of everyone involved in the community. So that's, I think, where we're going with this, and so we hope to have a taxonomy together soon. So let me tell you a little bit about what we did at UVA and why. So I come from a medical school that is, I mentioned, steeped in tradition. Thomas Jefferson did look down from Monticello while the school was being built. On his gravestone, for any history buffs here, which is at Monticello, he listed his 3 greatest achievements, which included author of the Declaration of Independence, author of the Virginia Bill of Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. So he left out president, he left out Secretary of State, left out Ambassador to France. So he left off what some people might think were important. Clearly this was, was a school that was, the centerpiece was a library, not a church. So a big, kind of change in American higher educational thinking. So we continue to talk about Mr. Jefferson and we always say Mr. Jefferson, as if he is in the next room at all times. So that's kind of how we work. So for us to change anything, it's a big deal. And in fact, as I was telling Rob earlier, we had students come to our medical school because we had such a traditional curriculum that until 2010, we still had biochemistry, anatomy, pathology, pharmacology, and tests at the end of each one of those with grades. So for us to change was a big deal. And I think now we are in a culture of change, which I'd like to think Mr. Jefferson would be proud of. So what happened in 2010 is we moved into this new building, which is round. The bottom room there is called the Learning Studio. The Learning Studio is filled with round tables, kind of learning in the round. It is the exact dimensions of the dome room of the rotunda designed by Mr. Jefferson, including like these paired columns that go around it and everything, which the columns in the rotunda hide bookshelves. It has an optical illusion. The columns in our Learning Studio don't even touch the ceiling and go to nowhere. So I have no idea what the point of them is, but it's all about look. So we moved into this new building. We increased our class size from 136 to 156 against the will of the faculty who were asked to vote on this and voted 100% not to do that, and no one cared. So don't know why we were asked, but so we increased our class size. Our plan was to increase it little by little over several years, and we over-admitted this year, and like everything, all of our previous algorithms and numbers just were out the door, and we over-admitted for the 156 by 15 students, and everyone accepted. And so it's every dean of admission's greatest nightmare, and we had that. So we went immediately to 156, and then we had some students get a scholarship to defer to the next year, which was the smartest thing they ever did, because you know the first year of a new curriculum, it's a disaster. So by the next year was so much better. So those students really won out. But we integrated everything in the pre-clerkship curriculum. We went from 2 years to 18 months and a heavy emphasis on team-based learning. And we completely restructured our Office of Student Affairs, where we previously had one dean for student affairs for all the students. We organized into 4 colleges, each college with their own dean of student affairs. So in my line of work, I'm a pediatrician, as Rena mentioned, so this is called ripping all your Band-Aids off at once. That's what we did, everything all at one time in the fall of 2010. So why did we move to the college system? So the idea was we were having a bigger class. We were finding that our students really needed more deaning, more support, more individualized support. Clearly there was this kind of, the pressure of the match. We needed more longitudinal career counseling, more oversight of academics and professional development, more support for that. And we really were very much interested in more vertical integration of our students and what was going to be the mechanism for that. And so we thought that the college system might be a way to do that. In the past, it had been, everyone loved our Dean of Student Affairs. He was my Dean of Student Affairs when I was a student there and is actually my next door neighbor. So of course I love him. But if you got called to see the Dean, that was a negative thing, almost 100% of the time. And I would say that our goal, which I think we have pretty much succeeded in, that in the 6 years since we started this, the students would view going to your dean as a positive thing, that when they have an issue, that is the first person they go to. And that was our goal for this, that we have their back, we are their support person, we are always their advocate. You don't always like being advocated for, but we are always their advocate. And I think that they just needed more individualized support. So that's where this came from. So we took that and we went to that. So 4 deans, 4 colleges, each with approximately 40 students per college. We named them after 4 prominent faculty and or alums of our university. So Tom Hunter was a dean in the years of kind of going to a real academic medical center. Walter Reed, many of you may remember, discovered that the mosquito transmitted yellow fever, so needless to say, the College of Reed College is yellow. Dr. Dungelson is my college. Dr. Dungelson is the first full-time professor of medicine in the United States. He was hired by Jefferson to be that. He was brought from Europe to come teach here full-time, teach in Virginia, and he was actually Jefferson's personal physician, and it was well known that Jefferson did not like physicians, so there must have been something special about Dr. Dungelson. He actually gave him a silver chalice that was engraved to him that used to be at Monticello, but we now have at the medical school in our rare books room. So I take my students to see this every year. And there may or may not be photos of someone in this room, drinking out of that thing, but I didn't put one of those in. And then Vivian Pinn, who is a pathologist, was the only female and only person of color in her medical school class. She graduated 50 years ago next spring. And she went on to found the Office of Women's Research at the NIH. We actually had to ask the NIH for permission to use her name. She, as she will tell you, she'll say it's her and 3 dead white guys, and that is the truth. So she is still living. She comes to visit all the time. She comes to all family day. She comes to graduation. She comes to everything. The Penn students always have their pictures taken with her. She's been a huge support. We just renamed a whole building after her. So I had to immediately text Vivian, you have a building named after you now. So this has been, I was worried about the naming, to be honest, because, it's Virginia. And so I was worried that they were going to name it as some, it was going to come out, it was some white supremacist something. I don't, there was real danger of that. Then I was worried about the, going to the highest bidder, and there was going to be the Nokia College and the Tostitos College. And so I'm like, why don't we just go with Colors or Rotunda and Serpentine Wall? And then we were handed these 4 names 2 weeks before the first students got here and said, divide them up and make it happen. And so we did. I will say that I wondered, because I'm like, let me get this straight. We're going to have 4 colleges, and we're going to have 4 deans. Is anyone else seeing the Harry Potter thing here? So the deans above me were like, Harry Potter? Had no idea what I was talking about. And I'm thinking, these students, their whole lives have been Harry Potter. So within 10 minutes of orientation on the first day of medical school, with our first class, one of my students said, Dr. Keeley, can our colors be green and silver? And I said, why? He goes, Slytherin colors. I'm like, but that would make me Snape. And, spoiler alert, he turns out good in the end. But, up until that point. So needless to say, the students latched onto it immediately. I didn't want there to be competitions. I thought that, let's not, this is about having your own dean. Who was I kidding, right? So the second years who were not in a college and had kind of a chip on their shoulder about it, to be perfectly honest. They're in our old curriculum. They're not in a college. And in fact, when the first years played the second years in what we call the Bedpan Bowl, which is a flag football game for charity every year, the new curriculum had paperless, no paper, we do everything online. And so I get to this football game, it's at night, and there's signs on either side that say things like, we have a college and you don't. We had paper, we don't. I'm like, this is the most nerdy sporting event I have ever attended. So anyway, they embraced it. But the second years plan all the events for orientation, right? So they begged me, please let us have a field day, please. There's 4 colleges, it could be 4 teams, please. So I said, okay, 1 competition. We'll just do this one thing. Then the colors got assigned by this one second-year med student because they didn't have colors. We didn't have anything. So he made those decisions, and we had tug of war, and they broke the rope. So classic medical student behavior. So field day is an annual event. Every year I send photos to this former medical student who's just finishing residency this year, and he's very proud of his legacy. So we really try to let the students plan their events, but that was a big one. So the idea, 4 deans, each responsible for a college, and I will say that of the Learning Community Institute schools, we are very unusual in this way, that many have 4 colleges, but the 4 student affairs dean structure is not that common. The responsibilities are all the things that you think of for traditional student affairs, so standard stuff, because of course we need all of those things. And as we describe it, we go from white coat to graduation. So at our white coat ceremony, they line up by college, they go up on stage by college, and their dean puts their white coat on. At graduation, they graduate by college, so the people with Z aren't always the last one anymore, so depending what college you're in. And so they come across the stage, and their dean is the one that hoods them at graduation before the big dean gives them their diploma. So everything in between. We do all the major events, we do all the career planning, we do all the match assistance, lots of social events, community service things, et cetera. So really kind of very traditional student affairs things, and we've added more things in by doing it by college. So that college of 40-ish students is then further subdivided into small, what we call clinical performance development groups, and each of those have 6 students and 2 mentors, 1 physician, 1 non-physician. The non-physician might be a nurse, a chaplain, a social worker, a pharmacist, a basic scientist, a variety of things. So these mentors are affiliated college faculty because all of my students have their small group on Monday. So one college has one afternoon where they have kind of their weekly traditional clinical skills course, some problem-based learning, et cetera, and they do that for 18 months. The idea then is that they continue to meet in their small groups quarterly during the 3rd and 4th year, which hasn't really worked out, and that these mentors are responsible for kind of the monitoring of their clinical skills development. I will say we're currently in a change of this because this means, given our 18-month pre-clerkship phase, we have 6 months of overlap, year of first year and then your second year for 6 months. So we have to have 2 whole cohorts of these mentors, meaning we have 52 mentors to be physician mentors, plus the non-physician mentors, 26 of them. You can imagine there are some quality control issues and just so many moving parts. And so I think what we're planning to do is shrink that by half and very much increase the role of this person, particularly as we move into an EPA framework. So that's in process. So again, graphically, there's the 4 colleges broken up into their smaller groups. And then you take my college, which is the blue one. And one of those little dots is the faculty student small group. So the 6 students with the faculty mentor. We also have the extra non-physician mentor, with the idea that we're working on all of these things: clinical skills, career advising, professional growth, wellness, service, all focusing on longitudinal relationships. So the student-to-student continuity, obviously these small groups, the CPD groups, are together through their 18 months and meeting weekly and doing their clinical skills education. What we then were very interested in, what many schools and Learning Communities Institute are interested in, is you can keep these groups together in the pre-clerkship phase, and then the clinical stuff happens and the whole college thing seems to fall apart somewhat. So we were concerned about that and decided we wanted to address this by having our students rotate through their clerkship year as a college. This came about by, I would say, me trying to make lemonade, because our previous curriculum dean decided that we were going to have 4 12-week clerkship blocks. We were just going to have that. I'm not really sure why. I don't know what was wrong with what we had, but we're going to have that. In order to do it, it meant that we were going to have to take pediatrics, that would be my specialty, from an 8-week clerkship to a 6-week clerkship. So in a meeting, I said, over my dead body, will pediatrics go from 8 weeks to 6 weeks and be below the national average? Put it in the minutes. So that was in the minutes. Nobody cared about my dead body, and we are a 6-week clerkship now. So I, sat in a corner and steamed about that for a while. But I thought, well, let me think. We've got 4 clerkship blocks and we've got 4 colleges. So I presented the idea, what if we had them rotate by college, which means that they wouldn't get to choose their clerkship schedule. Now, the choosing their clerkship schedule, as we all know, was an illusion of choice, right? So they thought they were getting to, and we were always changing it around, but they felt, if I don't have surgery first, if I don't have surgery third, that this was going to ruin their whole career and they'd never match. And I think we all know it doesn't matter what order you do them in, particularly at our medical school, where our clerkship year goes from March to March and our 4th year starts in March and goes for 15 months. It really doesn't matter the order you do it in. So the first year, as you can imagine, I got a tremendous amount of pushback, complaining from everyone, et cetera. And then it happened. And then after that, no more pushback, because it actually was very successful. The students know from the minute they enter medical school and are sorted into their colleges that they, what clerkship order they will have. And I will tell you that every single college will tell you why their order is the best one, which is what I was hoping for. So that actually has worked. And we are able, again, we go back to that Emily Wilson little diagram. So the residents keep changing, the attendings keep changing, but we are keeping those 40 students together. Now, granted, they are, half are on peds, half are on OB, so they're 20 and 20, but they are being mixed and matched as just those 40 all the way through the 3rd year. And we've done some surveying, and it really has strengthened their relationships. They'll tell you that they would have been friends with those people anyway. That's what the survey, but like 7 of them will say that same comment. So clearly it has something to do with the framework. And then we have some other efforts at vertically integrating. Within a college, they have, a big sibling program at orientation and for step 1 studying, et cetera. Athletic events. They now, again, I didn't want competition, but the class of 2015, their class gift was an engraved college cup. The whole big thing with the names on it and each cup. So they now compete for community fundraising, the field day, they do like a doctor, they had the physician doctor game, I forget what they call it, it was last week, where they are outside, trying to do ultrasounds really quickly, who's the fastest and who can find the murmur, and so that's a big competition. So I'm waiting for the day that I get to take points away from another college, like McGonigal, but I haven't gotten there yet. So, and again, we do things again in these smaller groups, and we utilize the older students to help that. And this year, we've really, really emphasized having the 4th-year students do a lot of teaching in the small clinical skills groups, and that's been great for everyone involved. So again, graphically, just so you can see how the clerkship thing goes, they progress through those 4 blocks. There are college meetings at specified times at the beginning, and then during the 3rd year to talk about 4th year. And then the small groups meet several times during the 3rd year, and then the students meet individually during the 3rd year with their dean. So starting really right now, once we meet individually with all the 1st years, we start meeting individually with all the 3rd years, planning for 4th year and thinking about specialty choice. So that's how that structure is working out. So again, to summarize, the learning community, at least for us, is these kind of different relationships, mentor-student, student-student, and dean-student, with the idea that over the long haul of the curriculum, we have oversight of skill development, we have support, peer support, and individualized student support with the feedback loop. So the mentors when they're concerned, they let me know. When I'm concerned, I let them know, and we can be supportive and have oversight at the same time. So then the question is, so do learning communities really make the difference, or a difference? And so I just wanted to share with you a few bit of outcomes that we have looked at, that several schools have looked at. The first couple are all from the University of Washington in Seattle. They've had learning communities for quite a while. They have remote campuses, and so that's how those are set up. So again, improved comfort with clinical skills, improved clerkship performance, a positive impact on the faculty's clinical skills, and what we're really going for here, improved perception of the learning environment. Some more recent things out of Vanderbilt, increased satisfaction with their advisory system. From Lars Osterberg at Stanford, no significant decrease in empathy from the 1st to the 2nd clinical year. So I think that, again, addresses some of that fragmented learning environment issues that we talked about at the beginning. And then very most recently, the AMA, as some of you may have known, did a very long-term study of, I think, 24 schools. We were not part of that, but there were several schools in the Learning Communities Institute who were in the study. They did not intend to look at this on the front end, but on the back end, the AMA came to us and retrospectively looked at the schools in their study, and they did all the burnout scales and the satisfaction scales and the learning environment scales. They went back and looked at the schools that had learning communities and schools that did not. And as you can see, learning communities are associated with a more positive learning environment in a multi-institutional medical school study. That's what we said. So we were very happy and relieved to see that data and to have that published. So that's what we're trying to get at. But it's not just about the students. So briefly to share with you that, the issues, there are a couple of articles in the last few years about it's not just students that are suffering from a lack of relational environment going on, or supportive environments going on, it's the faculty as well. And that may affect their professionalism, their vitality, their productivity, and this is what speaks to the deans, their retention. So we wanted to look at how learning communities are affecting the faculty that are involved. So several of us did a study in 2011 where we surveyed all of our learning communities faculty in the smaller groups, the bigger groups, et cetera, across several different schools that have different models. So that's who we were looking at. These are just a couple of the answers, but very strong impact on improving communication skills, which I don't think any of us could argue with that. And then what we thought was particularly interesting was that this was the job that gave, or the part of their job that gave them the greatest satisfaction. And so I think this is definitely, there's reciprocity here, and that's the definition of a learning community. Everybody has to have shared fulfillment. It can't just be one way. so the faculty too. For the last 2 years, and this will be our 3rd year next month, we have had a standalone Learning Communities Institute meeting apart from the AAMC. And at a meeting 2 years ago, we have administrator members of our organization, we have student members of our, because that's what a learning community is. All of those people are involved. So they're all different committees, and the students put on a workshop that was really good. And they surveyed themselves and asked for 3 words to describe learning communities. And that was their word cloud. They then surveyed the faculty, and that was the faculty's word cloud. And so when you look at them together, you know, there's a lot of positive words there. And I think the curriculum stuff ends up being a little smaller, but that supportive, the collaborative, I'd like to point out that the faculty, you see wellness at the top there. At that last year's meeting, the students did a huge workshop for everyone on wellness. And I think that a lot of learning communities, a lot of student affairs offices, et cetera, are all being charged with having wellness curriculums. So the students often would walk around talking about #wellness, because overdone, too much, you know, and they're like, well, if you're making me go to this thing for my wellness, it's having a negative impact on my wellness. And so that came up a lot. The students were super interesting to talk to about this. And so you can see that wellness was not on their list, even though some of the schools, that was their main reason for creating their learning community. So I thought that was very interesting. But a lot of really positive, healing and giving strength kind of words there. So can learning communities be this new organizing principle in medical education? So where you have these small groups of students, you prioritize relationships, knowing that relationships and these connections can really make a difference. Really then giving real thought and prioritizing the learning environment and the barometer of the learning environment and making sure that it is positive, because I think that can make a tremendous difference in offering kind of this sense of wholeness. And then finding that this is a framework to deliver a lot of things: curriculum, advising, wellness, organizing community service, really a variety of things. And I think that most of the schools that have been doing this for a while have put more and more things within this framework. And could this be a model for this UME, GME continuum? We are now, that's a new area of interest for us, is looking at the GME world and seeing whether learning communities can make sense there, and could we then have learning communities across the spectrum there, which could add all kinds of interesting and I think beneficial nuances both ways. So lastly, a little bit about the Learning Communities Institute, of which Mount Sinai is a member. This is our mission statement, which we're tweaking as we speak, as all organizations do. Our website, I'd encourage you to take a peek at. These are current members. We also have some schools that have just individual members that are not institutional members, who are just starting out and I think will be joining us soon. So. And we have many, many more people coming to, we have a meeting in a couple of weeks in Seattle, and we have 160 attendees, which is just at Dunbar's numbers there. So, and we're really conscious of that, because we really try and make sure the meeting is in a meta way reflects what we're talking about. We last year divided up into communities. We had T-shirts. We had games. So I think that this year we're probably not doing that because it'll be raining, but we are trying to kind of have smaller groups within the group, and I think it makes a big difference. The administrators have their own track, the students have a track, they're all putting on workshops, so it's a really collaborative group, and absolutely its own learning community. So lastly, as I mentioned, you know, I do talk about Mr. Jefferson as if he's in the next room, and as an employee of the University of Virginia, I am contractually required to include a direct quote in every talk. So here it is, that here where all is new, no innovation is feared, which offers good, from our founder itself. So I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk about learning communities and hopefully improve the learning environment for anyone that's interested, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions. Thanks for having me.